The idea of President Zelensky traveling to Moscow has come up before. Could it ever happen? Maybe, but it's hard to imagine under the current circumstances. One commentator recently joked, "Would you go to Moscow?" The reply came almost immediately. That would be difficult. Ukrainian drones are reaching deep into Russia these days. That exchange reflects a much larger story unfolding inside Russia. Years ago, Russian opposition leader Boris Nemtsov made a remarkable prediction about how Vladimir Putin's rule would eventually weaken. Nemtsov argued that the Kremlin's greatest weapon was fear. As long as people remained afraid, the system would survive. But the moment that fear stopped controlling society, pressure would build from every direction at once. He believed ordinary Russians would eventually stop staying silent. Military setbacks would become impossible to hide. At the same time, influential elites who once stood firmly behind the Kremlin would begin distancing themselves from the very leader they had trusted to protect their interests. Less than a year after making those remarks, Nemtsov was assassinated. Today, many observers believe several of the developments he warned about are beginning to unfold simultaneously. Across Russia, frustration is becoming increasingly visible. Some citizens are openly demanding severe punishment for officials they believe have failed the country. Wealthy businessmen who once benefited from the current system are also beginning to voice concerns about the direction Russia is taking. In this video, we'll examine why public anger is boiling over, what Russia's worsening fuel crisis reveals about the country's internal problems, and why criticism of the Kremlin is becoming more noticeable than it has been in years. We'll also look at what these developments could mean for Russia's future. Let's begin with the growing public frustration. Recent videos circulating online show ordinary Russians expressing anger in ways that would have been almost unthinkable just a few years ago. Some people, speaking openly on camera, have even suggested that corrupt or incompetent officials deserve the kind of harsh punishment associated with Stalin's era. One frustrated resident described spending hours searching for gasoline. He explained that vehicles were lined up for miles outside filling stations. Some drivers reportedly waited 5 or even 6 hours just to reach the pump. On one occasion, he said he left home around 2 in the morning, finally managed to buy fuel after several more hours, slept briefly, and then had to head straight back to work. He blamed officials whom he accused of enriching themselves while ordinary people suffered, saying families were wasting valuable time standing in endless queues instead of enjoying life, spending time together, or simply going to work. According to him, some people endured several hours of waiting only to be told that the station had completely run out of fuel by the time they reached the front of the line. For many drivers, that frustration has become an everyday reality. Not long ago, public criticism of this intensity carried enormous personal risk in Russia. Today, however, more citizens appear willing to express their anger openly. That doesn't necessarily mean people have suddenly become fearless. Rather, many analysts argue that the system of intimidation that once discouraged public criticism is no longer working as effectively as it once did. One major reason is Russia's worsening fuel shortage. Reports from several regions indicate that gasoline prices have climbed dramatically while supplies continue to tighten. In some areas, motorists face extremely high prices along with long waiting lines simply to purchase fuel. The situation appears especially striking given Russia's position as one of the world's largest holders of proven oil reserves. For comparison, drivers in many European countries often pay relatively high fuel prices because of taxes, while motorists in parts of the United States generally pay considerably less. Yet in several Russian regions, fuel has reportedly become even more expensive while also becoming increasingly difficult to obtain. As public frustration has grown, authorities have reportedly reduced the amount of gasoline price information released to the public. Critics argue that withholding statistics does little to solve the underlying problem because the shortages remain visible to everyone standing in line outside filling stations. Videos shared online show roads packed with vehicles stretching far beyond gas stations, creating traffic that lasts for hours. In some recordings, people waiting in line can even be heard playing songs referencing Vladimir Putin while expressing frustration over the situation. Several reports also claim that certain motorists have remained in queues for days without successfully buying fuel. Members of Russia's business elite, including individuals whose industries have benefited from wartime production, have also started raising concerns about the country's long-term direction. For years, many wealthy businessmen largely stayed away from politics while focusing on their companies. Now, however, some are warning that prolonged conflict, international isolation, and growing economic pressure could leave Russia facing serious structural challenges in the years ahead. When influential figures who once prospered under the existing system begin expressing concerns publicly, analysts often view it as another sign that confidence within elite circles may be changing. Whether every report can be independently confirmed or not, the widespread circulation of these stories highlights just how serious public concern has become. One incident attracted particular attention. A regional governor attempted to reassure citizens by insisting there was no real fuel shortage. Instead, he argued that panic buying was creating the appearance of a crisis. Ironically, reports later claimed that the governor himself became stranded after his own vehicle reportedly ran out of gasoline. If senior officials are struggling to obtain fuel, many Russians wonder how much more difficult daily life has become for ordinary citizens. The fuel shortage has affected far more than just transportation. For many people, it has become another reminder that daily life is becoming increasingly difficult. Rising prices, limited supplies, inflation, and disruptions to basic services are all adding to public frustration. One woman waiting in line described how exhausting the situation had become. She explained that after hours of waiting, station employees informed everyone there would be no gasoline available that day. Her frustration extended beyond fuel alone. She said unstable mobile internet had made it difficult to contact family members or manage her business, forcing her to absorb financial losses while simply trying to get through another day. Others in line shared similar concerns, explaining that some no longer had enough fuel even to return home. For many, these aren't isolated inconveniences. They represent a combination of economic hardship and uncertainty that continues to grow. Even some voices that previously supported the war have begun acknowledging how serious the situation has become. Posts circulating across Russian telegram channels describe damaged energy facilities, growing fuel shortages, and mounting concern over repeated strikes against oil infrastructure. Some commentators who once projected confidence are now openly appealing for the attacks to stop, reflecting a noticeable change in tone. Additional reports from citizens claim that certain regions have gone several days without fuel deliveries, leaving long lines outside filling stations with little hope of success. Whether every individual account can be independently confirmed or not, the volume of similar complaints suggests widespread public anxiety. These developments are also influencing how many Russians view the government's ability to manage the crisis. As daily problems become harder to ignore, more citizens appear to be questioning whether state institutions are prepared to protect ordinary people during prolonged emergencies. That growing uncertainty extends beyond fuel shortages. Residents in and around Moscow have increasingly spoken about overnight drone attacks reaching areas that many once believed were safely removed from the conflict. One woman described waking before sunrise after hearing reports that drones were flying overhead. Looking outside, she said she could see smoke rising from several locations nearby following explosions. She admitted that she had never experienced that level of fear before. According to her account, what disturbed her most was not only the attack itself, but the absence of clear public warnings. She said there were no emergency alerts, no evacuation guidance, and little official information explaining what residents were supposed to do. As explosions continued through the morning, parents reportedly gathered with their children inside apartment buildings, unsure whether remaining indoors was safer than trying to leave. She also expressed frustration over communication problems caused by internet disruptions, saying many residents struggled to contact relatives or obtain reliable information during the emergency. Her message ended with a broader appeal. She said that regardless of nationality, most ordinary people simply want to live peacefully without constantly worrying about missiles, drones, or war reaching their neighborhoods. In her view, civilians deserve practical guidance on how to protect themselves whenever such situations arise. Stories like these have fueled debate both inside and outside Russia. Some observers argue that public anger should be directed toward political leaders responsible for the conflict. Others point out that openly challenging an authoritarian government carries enormous personal risks. History has repeatedly shown that governments facing serious internal pressure often respond with force rather than compromise, making large-scale public resistance far more dangerous than many outside observers realize. At the same time, another important development has begun attracting attention. Criticism is no longer coming only from ordinary citizens. As pressure continues to build across Russia, another development is drawing increasing attention, not from ordinary citizens this time, but from influential figures who have long remained silent. For years, Russia's wealthiest businessmen generally avoided criticizing the government in public. The unwritten understanding was simple: focus on business, stay out of politics, and avoid challenging the Kremlin. That arrangement appeared to work for many of them. Now, however, some prominent voices are beginning to question where the country is headed. One leading industrialist recently warned that the longer the conflict continues, the greater the risk to Russia's economy and long-term stability. Rather than discussing short-term military objectives, he focused on the country's future, raising concerns about economic isolation, shrinking investment, and the possibility that Russia could become increasingly dependent on larger partners for trade and technology. His comments attracted attention because they came from someone whose industries have benefited from wartime production. Unlike longtime opposition figures, he is viewed as part of Russia's established business elite. When individuals from that circle begin expressing concern, analysts often see it as a sign that confidence behind the scenes may not be as strong as it once was. Several political observers have outlined different paths they believe Russia could face if current trends continue. One possibility is prolonged economic stagnation, with sanctions and declining investment limiting future growth. Another is deeper dependence on foreign partners for markets, financing, and industrial support. Others suggest the country could become increasingly isolated, prioritizing security over economic development while maintaining a permanent state of confrontation with the West. Whether any of those predictions become reality remains uncertain, but the fact that such discussions are now taking place openly marks a noticeable shift from previous years. At the same time, another question has emerged. Why are so many critical statements remaining online? For much of Putin's presidency, public criticism from high-profile individuals often carried significant consequences. Today, however, commentators have noticed that some outspoken remarks from business leaders, former government supporters, and even well-known public figures have remained available without an immediate public crackdown. Some analysts believe this simply reflects growing pressure on the system as authorities focus on other priorities. Others argue that internal disagreements may be becoming more visible than before. No one outside Russia's leadership can say with certainty what is happening behind closed doors, but the increase in public criticism has fueled speculation about changing dynamics within the country's political establishment. These developments have also renewed interest in the words of Boris Nemtsov, the Russian opposition leader who warned years ago that authoritarian systems often appear stable until multiple pressures begin arriving at the same time. According to his view, the greatest threat would not come from a single event. Instead, it would emerge gradually as military setbacks, economic difficulties, public frustration, and divisions among influential elites all combined into a much larger challenge. Looking at today's headlines, many observers believe several of those pressures are now unfolding simultaneously. Across Russian social media, citizens continue debating whether conditions will improve anytime soon. Some remain hopeful that the conflict will eventually de-escalate and daily life can return to normal. Others argue that the economic strain, repeated drone attacks, and uncertainty surrounding the future suggest the country may be entering an even more difficult period. One recurring theme appears again and again in these discussions. Many people no longer expect quick solutions. Instead, there is growing concern that the challenges facing ordinary families could continue for months or even years. Whether those fears prove justified remains to be seen. What is clear is that frustration is becoming increasingly visible, not only among ordinary citizens but also within circles that rarely spoke publicly in the past. And while debate continues inside Russia, the situation on the battlefield is also evolving, creating new military and political challenges that could influence what happens next. While political debate continues inside Russia, the fighting on the battlefield remains just as important. Over the past several weeks, both Russia and Ukraine have continued claiming successes along different parts of the front. As has been the case throughout the war, many of these claims are difficult to verify independently in real time, and control of some settlements has shifted repeatedly as combat continues. At the same time, Ukrainian forces have continued carrying out long-range strikes against military and energy-related targets far from the front lines. These operations are intended to disrupt logistics, reduce fuel supplies, and place additional pressure on Russia's ability to sustain military operations. The Kremlin, meanwhile, continues to insist that its forces are making progress and that its overall objectives remain unchanged. However, military analysts have pointed out that there is often a difference between official announcements and what can be independently confirmed on the ground. Throughout the conflict, both sides have released optimistic statements, while the reality on the battlefield has frequently proven far more complicated. Another challenge facing Russia is the growing cost of maintaining such a prolonged war. Every month requires additional manpower, equipment, ammunition, and financial resources. Replacing damaged vehicles, repairing infrastructure, and recruiting new soldiers all place increasing pressure on the country's economy. Ukraine also faces enormous challenges of its own, relying heavily on continued international military and financial support while defending a long front against a larger opponent. As a result, neither side appears close to achieving an easy or decisive victory. Instead, the conflict has become a prolonged war of endurance, where logistics, industrial production, technology, and public support may prove just as important as battlefield tactics. For Russia, the questions now extend far beyond military operations. Can the government manage growing economic pressure? Can public frustration be contained if living conditions continue to deteriorate? And can political unity be maintained if influential figures continue voicing concerns about the country's future? These are questions that cannot be answered overnight. What is clear is that the war is no longer affecting only the front lines. Its consequences are increasingly being felt inside Russian cities through economic uncertainty, security concerns, and growing public debate. Whether these pressures eventually produce meaningful political change remains impossible to predict. History has shown that governments can sometimes withstand significant internal challenges for years, while in other cases events change far more quickly than anyone expects. For now, one thing is certain. The conflict continues to reshape the lives of millions of people on both sides of the border, and every new development carries consequences that extend far beyond the battlefield itself. As always, we'll continue following these developments closely and bring you the latest verified updates as new information becomes available. If you found this analysis informative, consider supporting the channel by leaving a like, subscribing, and turning on notifications so you don't miss future updates. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.